War is often a laboratory. It's the litmus test that shows us who's with, who's against. That has been especially true of Europe and its performance over the course of the Iran war. It's been caught completely flat-footed, and we're still refusing to adapt. This stems from Europe's lab mentality, as I call it, the deep psychological foundations beneath its conduct across the board. And that's been actually backfiring and harming Europe's own strategic positioning. After over a month in which the US and Israel have been pounding Iran's military infrastructure, Macron and Starmer are now hosting a video conference, no less, in which they would try to finally figure out a way to defend the high seas, defend the Strait of Hormuz from Iranian aggression. But rest assured, that would be for purely defensive purposes and only, of course, after the cannons stop shooting. Basically, they're telling Trump and Israel, this is not how the world is supposed to work. But have they been preparing for the eventuality that it actually does? With the Middle East crisis still unfolding, where is this all going and why does it all matter? Stay tuned. Hello, this is Yissachar, and you're watching Briefly by Underscore. Before we continue, please consider hitting the subscribe button down below. That really helps us create much more amazing content for you guys. So the Iran war has been a teachable moment, not only when it comes to the Middle East, especially when it comes to Europe and its performance over the course of the past month or two. Many of these things stem from Europe's lab mentality, as I call it. Let me explain. Europe has developed what I call lab mentality, basically a sanitized version of a refined human being, in which treaties formed by consensus, delegates agreeing over coffee in the boardroom, expert in the commission dictates everyday life rather than the voters. So soft power, that is all about soft power and diplomacy over hard power and credible military threat. That would be faceless committees over national debates. When it's below the perfect threshold, Europe is simply not willing to play. And the result actually has backfired because it has actually been letting others dictate the pace for it, whether these are adversaries such as Iran and China and Russia, or allies such as Trump and the United States. It really does believe in an idealistic version of the world. And a lot of the frustration between, that the Trump administration has been feeling toward Europe stems from this very, I would say, these psychological foundations of Europe's conduct. So Europe has developed a playbook, the rules-based international order. The only problem is that it is more or less the only one who is playing. I'm not against the rules-based international order. All I'm saying is that Europe has not developed a credible plan B when things fall apart. Today, the European Union is the prime vocal voice that calls to preserve the rules-based international order, and primarily because it is the child of the trauma of World War II. It's especially true since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War. If you remember Fukuyama's End of History article, now infamous, a new era in which all countries will inevitably orbit toward a liberal democracy, and all of our disagreement will be arbitrated in the boardroom, not the battlefield. And that reflex that war is never the solution has led to dismal results. The lesson from World War II is not that everyone should demilitarize, that downsizing their army by 15%, like the UK has been doing, investing only 0.3% of their GDP in defense, like Ireland has been doing, perhaps possessing no tanks, like the Netherlands and Belgium, refusing to position air defense systems. All of that does not indicate progress, but a fundamental lack of understanding of the world in which Europe is operating. If you remember, just a short month before the Iran war, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio came to the Munich Security Conference, and he has been, widely hailed as, ushering a new era of US-Europe cooperation. And boy, did it not age well, especially for Europe, I think. Look at Marco Rubio's words, if I may. The euphoria of this triumph led us to a dangerous delusion that we had entered, quote, the end of history, that every nation would now be a liberal democracy, that the ties formed by trade and by commerce alone would now replace nationhood, that the rules-based global order, an overused term, would now replace the national interest. That was a foolish idea that ignored both human nature and it ignored the lesson of over 5,000 years of recorded human history. In a perfect world, all of these problems and more would be solved by diplomats and strongly worded resolutions, but we do not live in a perfect world. Bingo. Basically, he says, Europe, you need to up your game a little bit. And look, this coming Friday, Macron and Starmer are going to be hosting talks over the Strait of Hormuz. We heard we saw reports on coalitions that have been forming. Trump has been demanding them to really actively participate in the defense of the Strait of Hormuz. We heard of a coalition of 35 countries that agree: France, the UK, maybe South Korea, Japan, others who agree to form a coalition, but nothing really has been done. And to be honest, this is not particularly, the French and Royal Navies are now going to defend the Strait of Hormuz. What they're saying is that we are willing to participate for defensive measures and only after the war. This is exactly what I'm talking about, the sanitized version of the world. That does not exist. We don't live in a lab. Either you participate now or God knows what's going to happen in a week. But it's always about convening, hosting talks and dialogues. Hello, we've been doing this for almost 2 months now. It's time for you to act, not just urge to de-escalate like they've always been doing. It's not a bad thing to remind the world that we need to de-escalate and prefer diplomacy. But my fear is that, as I said, Europe is the only one who is playing in this rules-based game. And so purely defensive measures, that really does remind me of the former CENTCOM commander, or rather, under the Biden administration, what CENTCOM has been doing. For example, February 2024, the Houthis have been firing missiles at the U.S. Navy. They've done so at least 145 times, according to Marco Rubio. And back in the Biden administration, the CENTCOM stated this. On February 13th, we successfully conducted a self-defense strike against one mobile anti-ship cruise missile in Iranian-backed Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen. But they tracked the missile but took no action because the missile was not projected to impact near any ships. So they hit one missile that was really, locked and loaded, but not another missile that has not been locked and loaded. So that basically that lets the enemy dictate the terms of the battle for you. Just compare that with the present day CENTCOM under Trump. And I'm not saying that it's the military's fault, God forbid, but that really shows us the difference in attitude and the spirit. And of course, there's a new CENTCOM commander in place. When you actually have to use power, it has to go through a sanitized version of human beings in their perspective. That means there is a committee of experts. It's a rare use. There's proportionality only for defensive measures, only for self-defense. Just compare that to the attitude of the United States against Iran to proactively remove a threat, and Israel, of course, to proactively remove the threat posed by Iran. And God knows that Israel learned that lesson on October 7, not to appease, not to kick the can down the road, and not to wait for the enemy to strike first. So Trump has been asking them, as you probably heard, to up their commitment. That is Truth Social post. Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done. Go get your own oil, build up some delayed courage, go to the strait, and just take it. But then he goes on to say, you'll have to start learning how to fight for yourself. The USA won't be there to help you anymore, just like you weren't there for us. So I kind of understand the frustration by the Trump administration. Maybe saying that the U.S. would not be there to protect you at all is not the smartest thing to say. What I'm saying is that what's driving the Trump administration insane is that European mindset that we are not participating because it's not our war, because it's not the way the world is supposed to work. What I'm here to say is that they simply cannot fathom why Europe would not up its defense commitment in a tangible way, why it has been perceived as a free rider under American auspices. There's over 100K soldiers, like 100,000 soldiers, over $60 billion of American money, blood, and treasure invested in Europe annually. And so the real question is, what I'm here to say is that these are all the fruits of the same tree, the outlook of the world. We are not going to participate. The cocktail of idealistic foreign and defense policy, and with the internal collapse in the willingness to preserve and defend one's heritage and one's legacy, the Western civilization. And as someone who used to live in Europe, and I know it quite well, and I'm here, in fact, right now, I can tell you that you figure out after a while that it's all kind of connected. That is to say, the over-reliance on the state. You got NGOs in Europe that basically their whole income is state funding, which is scandalous in the United States. You got not fundraising, of course. You got colleges that foster what Dr. Victor Davis Hansen calls therapeutic degrees. That is to say, human rights studies, green studies, LGBT studies, and not. And of course, we don't have to exaggerate. Many people in Europe study computer engineer and all sorts of things. But you understand the drill, that this sort of apologetic attitude. If you ever been to at a protest when someone is waving an LGBTQ flag with a Palestine flag, shouting "Free Palestine" while wearing a shirt of Che Guevara and admiring Yasser Arafat as a sort of an anti-establishment leader, their laptop is probably full of stickers. You understand the gist. This all stems from the same place. Now, of course, I have to balance it. Countries such as Poland, Finland, even Germany have been gradually upping their game and investing more in defense. So in a perfect world, that plan would have worked effortlessly, right? I mean, there are treaties, everyone follows the rules. But what happens when that collapses? What happens when you need to police and check and balance? Once again, that explains the frustration of the Trump administration toward Europe across the board. Consider green energy, for example. Indeed, I am also in favor of gradually phasing out of polluting fossil fuel and increasingly, incorporate new energy, renewable energy, and of course, nuclear power. But what happens when that doesn't work? What happens when that's right now just too expensive? Are we going to just run into a brick wall, or are we going to, plan fossil fuels as plan B? Imagine, take soft power, for example. Yes, indeed, Europe's economic power and cultural power are gonna carry away, make other cultures be carried away and wanting to inexorbitantly, get into Europe's orbit. That actually is written in the European Union's documents. But what happens when others don't play by the rules? Are you preparing an eventuality like a contingency plan of hard power, credible military threat? That's exactly the problem. They want to encourage competition, and there's been an interesting headline in Forbes recently: scaling EU startups face a regulation maze. Basically, they're facing barriers because ideally there would be more and more regulations to make sure that everyone plays by the rules. But what happens when these very regulations are presenting those startup entrepreneurs with an incredible amount of regulations, with an unbelievable maze that they're facing? So how about we sort of balance this perfect world, with the forces of reality? So that really is across the board. So when the US is scrambling to figure out the EU's attitude, these are the deep psychological foundations beneath it. This is a continent that has devastated itself twice with 2 world wars that it had unleashed on itself, experienced the Cold Wars, and then was left out in the cold with scratched and traumatized, to the point where it is not meeting the pace of its enemies and not even its allies. The world is not waiting for the treaty. China is not waiting for the committee to convene, and Iran is not waiting for the video conference on Friday. So Europe should continue to believe in its ideals, but it should also prepare credible contingency plans, just in case history refuses to end. Thank you for watching Briefly by Underscore, and as always, please remember to like, share, and subscribe down below to be the first to watch the next episode.